Episode 2. Let's get started. Composition and staging designs. We're going to go through various different types of compositional designs that you can use to tell your stories. These are foundational designs, and then there's plenty of them. So we're going to go through 4 today, and then we'll go through the rest in another episode. And we're going to take a look at some film examples, some simple designs, and then some master examples. So let's get started. All right, the 2 films we're going to be studying today are grabbing our examples from Dr. Zhivago, directed by David Lean. Again, we talked about this last episode, David Lean being a master filmmaker. His compositions are absolutely beautiful. If you haven't seen this film, another great film, Academy Award winner, check it out. Definitely worth looking at. It's a long, epic film, so I think it's about 3.5 or some hours. So be prepared to plan for that. Another great movie, No Country for Old Men, directed by Cohen and Joel Cohen. If you haven't seen their movies, I should definitely recommend checking them out. They're also amazing, beautifully shot and lit. Check out their filmography for more. So these are the 2 movies we're going to take a look at and get examples from. So the first compositional design example is called The Steelyard. And this became popular, or the name came from Edgar Payne, the master painter, from his composition and oil painting book. If you haven't heard of that, I would Google it. It's a beautiful book. It should be out of print, but has some great examples of his compositions in plein air painting in oils. So he made this term kind of standard, and what it actually means is balancing a shape, a bigger shape, with a smaller shape. So in this simple example, let me pick my color. In this simple example, I've put this massive bush, could be a tree, whatever, against a character and balancing that composition. So it could be anything. Again, these are just simple examples, breaking it down to the complete ridiculous. I could have literally done this against this. That right there, an example of a steelyard composition. One thing to note with these as well, they are simple, but there are a lot of things that are happening that make it interesting. Like this example right here that I just did is a steelyard composition, but to make the composition more interesting, I varied the size. And we'll talk about this again, and I've mentioned this last week, difference in contrast and how that plays a role in making beautiful compositions. Because I could do a steelyard that would be this guy, and this is balanced, and that's a steelyard, but not very interesting. Now, I make it smaller, a lot more interesting than that big guy. I make it even smaller, interesting still. And you can see how the contrast there makes it even more interesting. Now, what if I did small and varied the shape? Now we got something even more interesting than this example here. So contrast, we'll talk about that, but just wanted to throw that in there as we look at steelyard composition. So balancing a larger shape with a smaller shape. Now, in this example, they don't have to be on the exact same plane. I could have this bigger and bring this guy, somewhere else. I can put this guy tiny, and this guy being much bigger. So, play around with that composition. So that's very simple. Now let's see how we can use it or see examples of it in film. So here's a good example. It doesn't have to be, even in the picture frame, but we have this shape And a story moment again, how does it tell the story? In this frame, there's a funeral happening. The little Dr. Zhivago, as you'll later meet, early on in the film, his mother passes away, and they're about to go to the funeral. So, staging it in this vast landscape, again, showing that this is a very remote village, probably not many people. So this shot already tells us that with the wide shot like this. And then how do we show that it's a funeral and people are about to approach the burial ground? You could put a simple cross, a religious symbol in the frame, and balance it with the people approaching the burial ground. So beautiful composition. It explains so much just by looking at this frame. There's a lot going on. Story moment. So whenever you're using this, no matter how simple, it can be used to tell your story visually and beautifully. Okay, here's an example from No Country for Old Men. Now, this could also be used as a 3-spot, and sometimes it can be organized as that if there's a character or something else. But simple shape against a smaller shape. Big shape versus small shape balanced. So you can see how we can stage another story point here. Our character is looking through a shootout that has happened. Everyone's dead. Car's shot up, and he's going through and checking out who's alive and what's actually going on here. Drug deal gone bad, and you can use a simple steelyard and tell a beautiful story visually, or even add another. If you took away this character, it'd still be a steelyard, but adding this guy might make it into a 3-spot that we talked about. But remove him and the story still stands, and we're using the steelyard composition. Now let's take a look at one more thing we can take a look at is an example from a master, and we talked about Edgar Payne's book, and here you can see in his example, master painter, a great guy to also study, how he uses the steelyard to frame his compositions. One shape against a bigger shape right here. So we're going to be using him as an example since he's a master in composition as well, to see how it plays out in the fine art world. So you can use it for several different things, you know, simple storyboarding comp or painting here, to film or even photography, and then landscape painting outdoors. Let's take a look at another one called the V. Now again, a very simple one, and you've probably seen this tons of times before. Simple V composition, using the elements around the frame to create a focal point, using the negative shape being the V. The negative shape, if we were to draw it out, is this area right here, being framed by the foreground elements. Makes the V right there, and frames our hero, so we have a strong focal area. Now, simple, nothing to it, right? Let's see how we can use it creatively. And this is the point, is having this simple compositions is really then up to you and how you use it to tell your story. And that's where the creativity of the artist comes in. So in Dr. Zhivago here, using characters on a train to frame our hero, female character, and to tell a story that she's now walking away. And if you watch the movies, you'll understand the story moments, but she's now walking away. It's a hard goodbye, and her back is turned. Dr. Zhivago is looking at her while she exits. So this is a moment of loss, and in the midst of what's happening with there's army rebels, there's a war, revolutionary war going on. How do we use that and tell the story creatively and beautifully through a photograph? Well, we can use it, and look how they use the V composition, framing her against the negative shape back there as she walks away. Here's another creative use for the V. We looked at how he's looking in the car. Now this is the opposite angle of the man in the car, and we can use elements inside of that car, the dead body versus, and using the steering wheel as compositional elements. Now this is using this simple V creatively. It can happen in landscapes as well, as we'll see in the master example, but look how creative this is, and how beautifully this is shot. Not many of us probably would have thought of doing this, but in the hands of real creative geniuses, we have a beautiful frame and a storytelling moment. He opens the door, doesn't know what to expect, and what we see is some kind of dead body framed up against a vehicle, and then the camera will probably cut to his perspective to show the body. So really beautiful use of that V composition. You can see how creative you can be with it instead of just using it. I've seen a lot of artwork out there using it pretty simply. This is the simplest way to use it, is framing it like this, or having beams come in and frame it. But when it's used creatively, it's absolutely gorgeous. Let's take a look at a master. Using the natural landscape to tell his story, creating this V and bringing our eye down to, and this is a mix of what we'll look at in a second, is the L compositional design and the V. So the V brings us in and the L pushes us to our focal area. So all of these examples can be used together creatively. Some can, some will be a little trickier, but all in all, it's always to create a focal point, a strong focal point, and tell your story all the time. Here's another creative way to use it, using a shape and another shape that's in shadow to bring our eye down to our focal point. Two great examples from Edgar Payne. Okay, let's take a look at the L that we just talked about. L composition right here. Simple again, breaking it down to its simplest form, a shape that's going to go in the shape of an L across the frame. That's a lying down L. We can do different examples of it. Will probably be, you can use it this way, using it straight down, reverse L, oops, all kinds of different ways, even angled L, to direct your, or to compose your story moment. Simple composition, nothing to it. Let's see how it's used creatively with a creative eye. Check this out. So he approaches a dead body again, continuing in the scene that we were looking at, and sure enough, using a nice L to frame our character and to tell a story. Beautiful example of how to use it creatively. Let's take a look at Edgar Payne, a master. Here we can see shape coming down and shifting our focus to our characters down here. Here's another example of using that V and the L composition. The shape here and pushing to our character. This is low res, so you can't see, but there are riders on horses in the frame. So combining the V&L, strong way of creating a focal point in your compositions. This could kind of be even maybe something of a U or a V in there. All right, let's jump to the next one. Our last one here. Opposing angles. Now this is, of course, probably the most generic one. We've seen, you know, mountains always coming in opposing angles and creating depth. The simple breakdown. You find it a lot in nature. So whenever you have a real mountainscape, you have some nice opposing angles coming in. But makes for beautiful compositions. Now you can add a character in here, as we'll see Edgar Payne's examples going along, whatever, maybe this is a wagon of some kind, and you can have your horses. But having that nice opposing angles creates a lot of depth and just more interesting compositions. Same thing here, kind of using it to push depth and make beautiful landscapes. And this right here is framed nicely. Again, could be a house, could be a cabin, could be characters, whatever you choose to put in your compositions to tell a story of landscapes. Opposing angles works for landscapes, but also can be used with horizontal versus verticals, and that's the contrast as well. Having things that are going straight up versus horizontally. So and we'll take a look at this example in greater depth in the next episode as we continue more with the compositional designs examples. Now let's take a look at a master use. So simple, and this I've just used two. I can't go through every single film to find the best examples, so some of them are quicker than others. But here's a great example of how you can use that in your compositions. So we have our story moment here, a cowboy traveling across the landscape, and how do we create an interesting composition? You know, most people would have done probably a simple landscape, maybe some mountains in the background, and maybe have our characters somewhere, you know, traveling. Kind of boring and simple. How can we create a little bit more of an interesting composition in our painting? Let's create opposing angles coming down and then frame our character. To see how we can start using it creatively. Again, another landscape shot, opposing angles, kind of similar. And he did this a lot. You can see if you ever Google his images, he uses opposing angles quite a bit in his compositions to create more interesting paintings. So there you go. These are 4 examples. We're going to cover some more in the next episode, but something to definitely think about and try out for yourself. Take a look at these films, pause them, and see where you can see examples of the steelyard, the V, the L, or opposing angles in both of these films. And again, create a little thumbnail and pause the film, block it in super simple like I just did, and that's going to really engrave it into your mind, being able to see it and how to play with it creatively to tell your own stories. So a couple of these might be on Netflix, I don't know, but try to find it somewhere, buy it, rent it. iTunes, Netflix, whatever. Pause it, break it down real quick as an exercise, go through them, and analyze how he's telling the story using these compositional designs, and practice on your own. Create different elements and just block in super simple stuff like I did, trying to tell a story of your own, and using these examples. That's when you're really going to engrave it in your mind and really not just forget it, but actually practice it and to nail it. All right, we'll see you next time, next episode.